On his birthday, Liam and his girlfriend Rachel experience a series of terrifying, inexplicable events in their home. Events that seem to revolve around a single, mysterious candle. As the candle relights itself, no matter how many times it's extinguished, a shadowy figure emerges, and eerie whispers urging Liam to make it count begin to haunt him. As the night unfolds, Liam realizes that the sinister force connected to the candle is tied to his mother's final words, and he must face an unsettling truth before the darkness consumes them both.
If you enjoy thrilling content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel.
My 34th birthday wasn't something I was looking forward to. It was the first one I'd spend without my mom, who passed away 6 months ago. She always made my birthday special. Even when I was older, she'd call me first thing in the morning, her voice filled with excitement, as if I were still a little boy waiting to blow out the candles on my cake. This year was different. I told my wife, Rachel, I didn't want to celebrate. A quiet night would have been enough, but Rachel had other plans. "You need this, Liam," she said, her tone soft yet firm as she set down a tray of snacks on the coffee table. "It's been a tough year, but you deserve to feel celebrated." I didn't have the heart to argue. Rachel had put so much effort into organizing a small gathering. Just a handful of close friends in our cozy living room, surrounded by the glow of fairy lights she'd strung up the night before. It was snowing outside, and the soft blanket of white covering the streets made everything eerily quiet, as if the world outside our home had come to a standstill. The party started like any other. Friends trickled in, shaking off the cold and stamping snow from their boots. They brought laughter and stories, but I couldn't shake the heavy feeling in my chest. Something about the night felt off. It wasn't long before I noticed Rachel glancing toward the kitchen, her brow furrowed. At first, I thought she was just distracted, maybe keeping tabs on the food she'd prepared. But then she pulled me aside. "Did you invite anyone else?" she asked in a hushed tone. I shook my head, confused. "No, just the usual crowd." "Why?" Her eyes flicked toward the doorway that led to the kitchen. I thought I saw someone standing there. A woman. But when I looked again, she was gone. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Probably just your reflection in the window or something. You've been running around all day." Rachel didn't laugh. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The night went on, and I did my best to engage with the guests, trying to ignore the creeping unease that had settled in the back of my mind. It wasn't until later, when one of my friends, Mark, casually asked, "Who's the woman by the kitchen?" that I felt my stomach drop. "There's no one in the kitchen," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Mark raised an eyebrow. "You sure? I just saw someone standing there a second ago." She looked kinda pale. I glanced at Rachel, who avoided my eyes. The room suddenly felt colder, like someone had opened a window, though all the windows were shut tight against the winter air. I tried to laugh it off, blaming the dim lighting or the reflection from the snow outside. But as the night wore on, the strange occurrences piled up. The soft creak of footsteps on the stairs when no one was upstairs. The faint sound of humming that seemed to come from nowhere. Rachel and I exchanged nervous glances throughout the night, but we didn't say anything. Not in front of the guests. By the time it was time for cake, I was ready for the night to end. Rachel brought out a small chocolate cake with a single candle in the middle, the flame flickering softly as everyone gathered around. The singing felt hollow, as if no one's heart was really in it. I leaned forward to blow out the candle, silently wishing for the night to end without any more strange interruptions. I blew, and the room plunged into darkness. For a moment, the room was completely silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making every breath feel louder than it should. Did the power just go out? Mark's voice broke the stillness, but it sounded unsure, almost hesitant. "No, the fireplace is still on," Rachel whispered, her hand gripping my arm tightly. She was right. The warm glow of the fire crackled in the corner of the room, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. But everything else, the lights, the sound system, even the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, was dead. "I'll check the fuse box," I muttered, standing up. My legs felt heavy, as if they didn't want to carry me. "No," Rachel said quickly, pulling me back down. Her voice was shaky. "Just stay. It'll probably come back on." But the light didn't come back. The candle on the cake, the one I had just blown out, was suddenly the brightest thing in the room. Its flame burned steadily, brighter than it should have, casting an unnatural glow across the table. "Wait," Rachel said, her voice barely audible. "Did someone relight the candle?" I glanced around the room, but no one moved. Everyone was frozen, staring at the cake. "No one touched it," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The flame flickered, almost in response, and for a second, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the far wall. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. Just the faint outlines of the furniture bathed in the dim glow of the fire. "I'm getting out of here," one of the guests, Laura, said suddenly, her voice high-pitched with panic. She grabbed her coat from the back of the couch, but as she turned toward the door, the sound of soft humming filled the room. It was faint at first, almost like a distant lullaby, but it grew louder, weaving its way through the silence. The sound was coming from the hallway that led to the kitchen. "Oh, who is that?" Laura whispered, clutching her coat tightly against her chest. No one answered. I felt Rachel's grip tighten on my arm. "Liam," she said under her breath, her voice trembling. "We need to leave." I nodded, but my legs refused to move. My eyes were glued to the dark hallway, where the humming seemed to echo from. It was familiar, hauntingly so, like a tune I'd heard long ago, but couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the candle on the cake flared brighter, and the humming stopped. The flame flickered violently, casting strange, erratic shadows on the walls. Then, as quickly as it had started, the light snapped back on. The sound of the refrigerator humming to life in the kitchen startled everyone, and we all let out a collective breath we didn't realize we were holding. "It's probably just a power surge," Mark said, though his voice wavered. No one believed him. Rachel and I exchanged a glance. She didn't say anything, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Something was wrong with the house tonight, and we both knew it. The guests began to leave shortly after that. No one said much, just murmured quick goodbyes as they shuffled out into the cold night. By the time the last person was gone, the house felt eerily quiet again. Rachel locked the door and turned to me. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, "but maybe it's nothing. Maybe we're just on edge because of..." I trailed off, but Rachel knew what I meant. My mom. The grief. The weight of her absence. "Let's just clean up and go to bed," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Rachel nodded, though she still looked uneasy. As she walked toward the kitchen to start cleaning, I stayed behind to blow out the candle. But when I reached for it, the flame suddenly went out on its own. I froze, staring at the faint wisp of smoke curling upward. And then I heard it, a soft whisper, so close it felt like it was right behind me. "Make it count." Rachel didn't hear it. She was still in the kitchen, stacking plates and running water in the sink. I stood frozen by the dining table, my hand hovering over the extinguished candle. The whisper echoed in my mind, soft and deliberate, like someone speaking directly into my ear. "Make it count." I spun around quickly, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the room was empty. The only sounds were the faint clatter of dishes and the wind howling against the windows. "Liam?" Rachel called from the kitchen. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice sounded weak, even to me. The unease from earlier had grown into a gnawing sense of dread. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Grief does strange things to people, after all. I grabbed the candle, intending to toss it in the trash, but as soon as I touched it, the flame flickered back to life. I jerked my hand away, nearly dropping it. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the glowing flame. It didn't make sense. "Rachel!" I called, my voice sharper than I intended. She appeared in the doorway, her hands still wet from washing dishes. "What's wrong?" I held up the cake, the single candle burning brightly on top. "Did you see that?" She frowned. "See what?" "The candle." I blew it out, but it just lit itself again. Rachel stared at me for a moment, then walked over to the table. She studied the candle with a mix of skepticism and unease. "Maybe it's one of those trick candles," she suggested, though her voice lacked confidence. "It's not," I said firmly. "I didn't buy trick candles. And even if I did, they don't just relight themselves like this." Rachel hesitated, then leaned forward and blew out the candle herself. We both watched as the smoke curled into the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the flame reignited. Rachel gasped and took a step back, her face pale. "What the hell?" I didn't have an answer. My hands were clammy, my pulse racing. I grabbed the candle and carried it into the kitchen. Rachel followed close behind, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I opened the trash can and tossed the candle inside, slamming the lid shut. "There," I said, my voice shaking. "Problem solved." Rachel didn't respond. She was staring at the trash can, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Liam," she whispered. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. A faint glow was seeping through the edges of the trash can lid. "No way," I muttered, stepping forward and lifting the lid. The candle sat among the scraps of leftover food and crumpled paper towels, burning steadily as if nothing had happened. Rachel let out a nervous laugh, though it was more panic than humor. "This isn't real. It can't be real." I didn't know what to say. My hands trembled as I reached into the trash and grabbed the candle. The flame didn't burn me, but it felt warm, almost alive. "Maybe we should call someone," Rachel said hesitantly. "Call who?" I snapped, my frustration and fear bubbling to the surface. "The fire department? Ghostbusters? What are we supposed to say?" Rachel flinched at my tone, and I immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry," I said, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what's happening." She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me she was just as scared as I was. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the candle burning between us. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "Maybe we should check the security cameras." The idea hadn't even crossed my mind. We had a few cameras set up around the house, mostly for peace of mind when we were away. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, scrolling through the footage from earlier in the night. The first few clips were normal. Guests arriving, mingling in the living room, and Rachel bringing out the cake. But when I got to the moment the candle first relit itself, the footage glitched. The screen flickered, and for a split second, a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the kitchen. It wasn't clear enough to make out details, but it was unmistakably human. "Did you see that?" I asked, showing the screen to Rachel. Her face went pale. "Go back." I rewound the clip and paused on the frame with the figure. It stood motionless, its outline faint but distinct. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered. No one was in the kitchen. Before I could respond, the app froze. The screen went black, and a notification popped up. "Playback error. Please try again later." "Great," I muttered, tossing my phone onto the counter. Rachel didn't say anything. She was staring at the cake, her eyes wide. By the time Rachel and I sat down in the living room, it felt like the air in the house had grown heavier, pressing down on us with an invisible weight. The candle was now sitting on the coffee table, its stub so small it should have burned out long ago, yet the flame persisted. Neither of us could bring ourselves to touch it again. Rachel clutched a mug of tea, her hands trembling slightly. I held my laptop, determined to figure out what was going on with the security footage. The app on my phone was useless now, so I pulled up the saved recordings on the laptop's hard drive. "Maybe it's just a glitch," Rachel said, though her tone was far from convincing. "Maybe," I muttered, though I didn't believe it either. I started scrubbing through the footage from earlier in the night. The videos played without issue until I reached the moment the candle relit itself. Just like on my phone, the screen flickered and the playback froze. "Wait," Rachel said suddenly. She leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Go back." I rewound the clip frame by frame. And there it was again, the shadowy figure standing in the corner of the kitchen. It was clearer this time. The figure was tall and thin, its form blurred like a smudge on a camera lens. It didn't move, but its presence was undeniable. "Who is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, though the pit in my stomach told me this wasn't just a trick of the light. I played the clip forward. The shadow vanished for a moment, then reappeared in a different corner of the room. It was closer this time, its outline more defined. Rachel gripped my arm tightly. "Liam, turn it off." I hesitated. "We need to see this, Rachel. Maybe it'll help us figure out what's happening." She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "This isn't normal. This isn't." She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze shifting to something behind me. "Rachel?" I asked, my voice low. Her face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to scream but couldn't. Slowly, I turned around. The shadowy figure was there, standing in the corner of the living room. For a moment, neither of us moved. The figure didn't either. It was like a dark void, its edges blending into the dim light of the room. There were no eyes, no face, just a hollow presence that seemed to suck the air out of the space. Rachel's mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. The sound broke the silence, and as if reacting to it, the shadow began to shift. It didn't walk or glide. It simply blurred, like a smudge being dragged across a page. "Run," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the front door. The candle on the coffee table flared brighter, casting strange, jagged shadows across the walls. The air grew colder with every step we took, and the house felt unnaturally quiet, save for the sound of our own frantic breathing. When we reached the door, I yanked it open, expecting the icy chill of the winter night to hit us. But outside wasn't the street. It was the kitchen. Rachel let out a strangled cry, and I slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the lock, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. "It's not real," I said, though the words felt hollow. The shadow appeared again, this time standing in the center of the living room. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. The candlelight flickered wildly, casting its distorted form onto the walls. "What do you want?" Rachel shouted, her voice breaking. The shadow didn't respond, but the flame on the candle grew taller, brighter. It cast a circle of light around the shadow, illuminating something on the floor. A message scrawled in what looked like ash. Make it count. I stared at the words, my mind racing. The whisper I'd heard earlier echoed in my head. The strange, familiar tune from the hallway. The way the shadow seemed to follow the candle wherever it went. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. It had something to do with me. The words on the floor lingered in my mind, like a weight pressing down on me. Make it count. It made no sense, and yet it felt like the only thing that mattered. Rachel stood beside me, her face pale and strained as she watched the shadow slowly move closer to us. The candle, flickering madly, burned brighter with every passing second, casting long, grotesque shadows that seemed to shift and warp in unnatural ways. We need to get out of here, Rachel whispered, her voice tight with panic. This isn't real. This can't be real. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Why was the candle still burning? Why had it started on my birthday? And why did the shadow feel so familiar? My eyes wandered back to the words on the floor. I could almost hear the voice again, the whisper that had haunted me since the night began. Make it count. A flash of memory hit me, one that had been buried deep. My mother, her voice on the phone, wishing me a happy birthday just before she passed. She'd said something odd that year. Make it count, Liam. I had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just one of those things people say when they know their time is running out. But now, with the figure in the room and the strange occurrences piling up, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Rachel stepped closer to me, her voice barely audible. Liam, are you listening? We need to leave. I turned to her, my heart racing. No, we can't leave. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and Rachel looked at me, confused and fearful. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. It's tied to me, I said, the truth dawning on me with a terrible clarity. This thing, whatever it is, it's been waiting for me. For my birthday. Rachel took a step back, her hand over her mouth. What are you talking about? You're scaring me, Liam? I didn't know how to explain it, but somehow I knew I was the key. The shadow, the candle, the whispers, everything led back to me, to my mother's last words. Liam, we have to go, Rachel said urgently, her eyes scanning the room. Please. But I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. Not until I figured this out. The shadow grew taller, darker. It started to stretch toward the candle, its form becoming more defined. I could feel the temperature drop, the air thick with a suffocating presence. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a thing, a force that seemed to be pulling at the very fabric of the room. I could feel it pressing in on us, suffocating us. Then the candle flickered once more, and the flame went out. The room plunged into darkness. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. The faint light illuminated the space, but the shadow remained. It was closer now, standing at the edge of the table where the candle had been. Its presence felt even more oppressive, like it was drawing me in, pulling me toward it. And then I heard it again, a whisper. Make it count. This time, the voice was clear, not just in my mind. It was real, like someone was standing behind me, their breath cold against my neck. I whirled around, but there was no one there, just the empty, dark corners of the room. I could feel it now. Something had changed. The presence in the room had taken a new shape, and it was waiting, watching, waiting for me to do something, anything. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. The floor creaked beneath my weight, and for a brief moment, everything felt still. The candle was gone now, but I could still feel its presence, as if the flame had burned itself into the very fabric of the room. Liam, Rachel said, her voice shaky. Please, we can't stay here. But I was beyond reasoning. The words from my mother echoed in my mind again. Make it count. I had no idea what it meant, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, the shadow was gone. But the room had changed. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the silence was deafening. Rachel's voice was gone, as if the air itself had swallowed it up. The temperature had dropped further, and I felt a strange tingling sensation on my skin. And then I heard it again, this time, not a whisper but a voice. A woman's voice, soft and calm. Make it count, Liam. You've kept me waiting long enough. The room grew darker, the edges of the walls fading into blackness. A cold gust of wind blew through the house, extinguishing all the lights, leaving us in total darkness. But I could feel the presence of the figure behind me, waiting. Liam, I love you, but it's time. Before I could move, I felt a sharp, searing pain in my chest. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor. And just before the darkness swallowed me whole, I heard the candle's final whisper. Make it count.